Thank you, Anna. I must say that when Anna emailed me, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago to tell me about this conference, I almost fell off my chair because I live in Belgium, where we have great environmental and ecological artists, but we have absolutely no institutional support. So the concept that Anna was able to brainstorm a conference in connection with an exhibition that's here, I think is really lucky and really amazing. And I hope that it will wake up some of our institutions to what's going on in our country, because I'm an American living in Belgium. That's why I'm describing it as my country. But I do feel Belgian, and it's important. Okay, I'm so happy that Alan brought up collaboration, because I think if I had a Beatles song, I didn't prepare a Beatles song, but my Beatles song is, I get a little help from my friends. First of all, I'm a curator, so I always need artists, absolutely, number one. Number two, these ecoventions, I'm going to explain a little bit what that means, but they're all collaborative. There's never, ever been one of these projects that hasn't been an artist working with scientists and with politicians and with the people of the community, the stakeholders. All these artworks have to be maintained when people leave. They require that the artists make friends in the community who can be the stakeholders, the people that the artworks are made for and that will take care of them. I'm sure Alan could tell lots of stories of befriending people to take care of his work after he leaves. Okay, so I want to give a little history, because Anna said to me, oh, I want you to talk about your next show. And then I'm sitting here in the audience all day thinking, gosh, people probably don't even know what Ecovention means or what I'm thinking about or how it goes. So I'm going to give a really brief story. So almost 20 years ago, in 1999, I was living in New York City, and I just happened to be living with Amy Lipton, who was a friend of mine from when I had lived in New York City before. And I was going to galleries one day, and one of the galleries says to me, oh, Sue, you don't know this, but my new gallery is only focused on the 70s. And could you think of a show that has something to do with the 70s? That was really strange, because I had had a contemporary gallery in Los Angeles, and I showed only artists from, who made the art the week before. So I'm not an art historian, I had no thought about the 70s. It's not that I didn't know about it, but it didn't occur to me to ever do a show about the 70s. So I came home, I said, oh gosh, Amy, this is so strange. Someone said to me that I should try to do a show about the 70s. And she's like, well, Sue, there hasn't really been a really proper LandArt show. I go, really? And she had all the books, she had all the books, and we were looking through the books and we're thinking about it. We're thinking LandArt, Earthworks, Alan was on our list, Patricia Johansson, who else? Well, Smithson, you name it, all those kinds of people. And I'm thinking, Amy, what's really interesting here that really has never been discussed? And she's like, what's that? I go, all this art is doing something. And she goes, well, what do you mean? I go, well, look at Smithson's Spiral Jetty. It's really it's a haven. It is a place where brine can live. It creates a protective environment for habitat. She's like, oh, that's interesting. Still, no one has written about that. So the point is that we were looking at all these earthworks. We were looking at, Agnes, of course, Agnes Dennis is on the list. All these artworks seem to have an interesting function that was helping the ecologies. So this is how we came up with this idea that art to transform ecologies. So Ecovention is just simply a hybrid of ecology plus invention. And you'll read some books where people say, oh, we don't know why Sue Spaid and Amy Lipton make such a big deal about invention. Art doesn't have to be innovative. It's art. It doesn't. And I think at the time, I think Alan expressed this really clearly, a lot of the artworks that we wanted to focus on, people didn't really think of as art. So I had this idea, well, if we focus on invention, and we focus on artists doing something for the first time that no one ever thought about before, maybe they would take it more seriously as art. And I think, in hindsight, this is already almost 20 years ago, I think people now are much more accepting of this idea of artists working with scientists and coming up with innovative solutions to transform the ecology. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is my beginning date, 1962. So does anyone have an idea why my start date is 1962? I'm born in 61, so no, it has nothing to do with me. It's Joseph Beuys. So in 1962, he did his piece called Elbe Action for the Elbe, where he wanted to draw people's attention in Hamburg to the river and to the fact that it was polluted. And I have no idea what he did, and this is a mystery. If anyone out there has ever read, I've spent hours researching what this Elbe Action was. I don't know whether he even went to the Elbe, but the point is, it was always it remained on his CV forever. It's like Elbe Action. You don't know what it is, but it must have been important to him. I'm not saying it was important to the world, but it was important enough to him that he kept it on his CV. So in my mind, it is the first moment when an artist is having the rest of society look at ecological issues, number one, and number two, it's extremely important, this word action. And right now we're in a big battle in the art world between actions and situations. And I'm going to show you my next slide, but I'm focused really on actions. And so maybe people will come up afterwards and say, I'm crazy, why am I making a big deal about this? But it's something, I want to be precise, that's all. I'm trained in philosophy. It's very important that I'm very definitional, and then it also helps me to curate because I know what should be in and what should be out. And what is not like, I want to be clear, I do not think everything except for ecoventions is terrible. I have no view like that. I have a view that we need every kind of artist, every kind of artist, and there's nothing that's better than the other, but for the purpose of my research, I'm focused in this area. So I don't really have a pointer, right? I have no, okay. So the point is, the ecoventions fit in this square of being practical. So the top two squares, social and practical, in my mind are when the move for the artist to go back into the real world. So they're no longer in the white cube. The social ones want to interact with ordinary people on the street, or making art that ordinary people can enjoy. They don't have to go to the gallery, they don't have to go to the museum. And then the practical people are also in the real world, but they're doing actions, and they're really focused on like, what can we do to make a difference? And the political art, again, a lot of times these are things that are just as action oriented, but they're usually happening in the galleries, for the art world. When the artists are doing the more political art, they have an imaginary audience. They're not just really trying to deal with everyday people or everyday situations. Excuse me. And then, in my mind, conceptual art is a kind of, again, in the art world, and it's a situation. It's open-ended. So these situations are sort of open-ended. Well, I would say actions are open-ended too, because you can never really control how things are going to happen. And a lot of times people are critical of ecoventions because they say, well, when you have an artist and they're trying to do something, it destroys art. Art should be open-ended. And I think that the key is that, in fact, all these projects are open-ended because, in fact, because they're innovative, no one really knows how they're going to turn out. An artist has an idea, they have an inkling, and they want to try something, but they're not looking in a cookbook and saying, well, the best way to restore this wetland would be to do this, because in fact, there is no cookbook. And that's another aspect. That's briefly how I would distinguish ecoventions or green art from green design. Because a lot of the designers have best practices, and it's something you can teach, where these eco-artists are really experimenting. Okay, so I just want to, so Anna mentioned that the show will open next year in Sittard, and I'm working on a book, and the book is going to be bigger than either of my two other big books, because in fact there's a ton of stuff going on in Europe, and none of these artists, we talked about Niels not knowing Andy Goldsworthy, well, none of these artists know each other, even like the 6 Polish artists don't know each other. So it's been a kind of a crazy research trip, just meeting people and asking them, like, do you know anything about this? And then trying to go to the countries and trying to meet the people. And anyway, it's been a mind-boggling experience for me, but a good one, a very positive one. So in my book, in the introduction part, I just simply tell the backstory about how Amy and I came up with this idea and what happened afterwards. I mean, our idea sort of fell flat only because what happened was the social and art. After we do Ecovention, and we're focused so much on the different things artists could do to ameliorate the world ecologically, all of a sudden everyone just wants to have a conversation. And it became the social, and artists were organizing all these conversations all over the place. And this was really the opposite of an action. And I really see now, 10 years later, a turn back to actions. So the introduction in my book is really more about an intro to the idea, whereas in the exhibition it will be actual live ecoventions. So it's not just simply looking at photos of things or documents. And that's a really important part of my curating. I think it's really unfair to people that they just, no offense, Niels, because you're making your photographs, but I think it's unfair when all that they're experiencing is a movie of something or a picture of something, and they don't get to see something real and understand how it functions. So I think, because I don't know how much time I have, but I'm going to focus mostly on the commissions for the show, because that will give you an idea of what to expect, and if we have time I can show you more works, right? That makes sense. What time am I ending?
6.
Okay, all right. So it's important, let me just go through these sections a little bit. So in the first book that Amy and I worked on, we had these 5 different categories. We had activism. Oh, do I want some water? Okay. We had activism, because activism is a really important part of these actions, because on a certain level it's awareness. It's not necessarily an ecological action. But when you see the breadth of the creative things that artists have done to draw attention to these issues, and every one of the ones that I include are ones that had an effect. Like there's this amazing Polish artist who climbed a different tree every day for 360. Is my speaking okay? Okay, all right. I'm always in trouble for speaking too quickly, and it's really bad when everyone else has English as a second language, so. Anyway, activism. Like I said, there's so many artists who are really doing activism that actually does change the world. And that's, I think, an important issue. That it's not just simply going to a protest, but having real outcomes and real changing politicians' minds. So valuing anew is an interesting one. This is one that was inspired by Smithson, who, as you know, refused to do any restoration and really tried to keep things as they are. But in Europe, we have someone called Lois Weinberger, who's really, another historical figure who's also teaching us how to live with, in Europe we call them a wasteland, in the States they're called brownfields. So the valuing anew section is really about artists who don't necessarily change the space that they're dealing with. They just teach us how to see it differently. And I think this is really interesting. There's 2 American artists who did a project in Pittsburgh where the whole city they were so spent on renovating a stream, and the artist kept saying, no, but the stream is still alive. And the people couldn't believe it. And they finally caught a fish in the stream, and they said, hey, this comes from this stream, it's alive. And then the city was like, oh. So a lot of times the artists are able to show people new ways to look at the world without even doing anything, and I think that's really interesting. Biodiversity is extremely important. Obviously, Kuhn van Mechelen's in my show. Urban infrastructure, it's very different in Europe than it is in the States. But I decided to focus on, I'll talk a little bit about that when we have some pictures. Reclamation, restoration, it's much bigger in the States than it is in Europe. There's a couple projects, but it's definitely a slimmer chapter. Food security is a new chapter in our book, but I did a whole book called Green Acres, which was all about this issue. But of course, urban farming, artists organizing urban farms is a relatively new project the last 10 years. Climate change, of course, is important. And oikos, what is oikos? Oikos is actually the Greek word for home. And there's so many artists right now that are dealing with, coming with all sorts of mystical rituals and healings and well-being, and this is a huge topic in art right now. And so we just sort of put all these kinds of artists in this oikos chapter, and originally it was kind of like a miscellaneous, but now that I've written the chapter, it's very well it makes sense to me a lot more, and I learned a lot by doing it. I learned so much. I want to do an entire book on this aspect of art, but that's a 5-year project. That's not anytime soon. Okay, so now this is just an outline. I'm going to give you pictures for all these people, but this just gives you an outline of all the people that will be coming to Sittard to do local ecoventions, and some are more performance-oriented, and some are more potential. But I'm going to show you pictures of all these people so I don't have to go through them. Okay. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with Georg Dietzler, but he's someone he does do restoration, and his whole project has been thus far with the oyster mushroom. It's interesting because a lot of artists these days are working with oyster mushrooms, but 20 years ago when he started, it was a totally crazy idea to use oyster mushrooms to remove PCBs from sites that were contaminated. So we're not sure yet what he's going to do. He has to make another site visit, but it will be definitely something with oyster mushrooms. This is a Danish artist, Nils Romer, and he installed this before in Copenhagen. But it's a funny thing because it's all done by computers, but the window opens, so when it's super beautiful, clean air, the window is all the way open, and then it can intersect the little green bar, and when it's like a terrible air day, it's closed and it just intersects the red. But the good thing is the people on the street can look up every day to City Hall, and we're going to have this installed at City Hall in Sittard, but the people every day can look up and see what the air quality is. So that would be an example of someone doing an activist, that's an example in my mind of activism. This is Veritains. She's a Belgian artist. I was actually hoping she would come to this conference. I told her to come. Anyway, she is a kind of one-woman wastewater treatment plant. If you go to her house/studio/park, it's amazing. She's doing all sorts of experiments. She prides herself in, well, she's totally correct to be proud, but she says, I clean water cleaner than any plant in all of Europe, because no plant has figured out how to get rid of hormones, and I figured out how to do it. And she does everything with plants. So she has she's got 2 experiments going. One is the rainwater plant, and the other is gray water. So she just built a little guest house on her land, and she's got all of her gray water and brown water running from this house through this plant situation, and then she can test it on the other end. So like I said, she's like a one-person wastewater treatment plant and studio lab all in one. But anyway, if you can see from this drawing, you can see there's these different boxes with different plants, and she's going to connect it into this drain pipe so that it'll be a physical thing. People can experience it. They can see the rainwater coming out. They can see what it's like when it arrives. And to be honest, she told me there's only one, this is the technical term for this is natural infiltration. And she told me that there's only one such plant in all of Europe that treats water with plants. So this will be hopefully something that the EU will show up. I've actually given talks to the Commission before on all these art projects. So hopefully I can get them to come and pay attention, because they have $40 million to spend on these kinds of projects, and they have no clue who does them and how they can be done. It's the most bizarre experience to go to the Commission and give a talk, and to see all their posters on biodiversity and natural infiltration and art and science, and then they don't have any clue who. I don't know how you get the ideas before you learn about the people who do that, but anyway. But this will be, hopefully this will really have an impact in Europe. This is a funny group. They're Polish artists who deal only with animals, and they always have animals in their art exhibition. And as everyone knows, cats are huge bird killers. So you see the cat's eye, but what the actual artwork is that little brass thing on the side of the building, which is meant to be a special perch for birds. It's a free space for birds where they can go and be protected. And I would put this sort of loosely in biodiversity. This is Jean-François Paquet. He's been working on these edible environments with the idea that while you're eating, you're thinking about your next meal. It's really 0 km. Everything is within reach. And because Clive talked about last year being International Year of Soils, this year is the International Year of Pulses. And pulse is the British term for legume, like haricot or bone-in. And so he's been growing. So in this edible environment, he's not in the food security part, you would think he is, but he's really in biodiversity because his whole project is using these small planters and growing as many plants together very intensely and seeing how they respond to each other. So instead of having rows of vegetables, anyway, so in between growing 20 different kinds of beans, you can see the different beans he's growing, there's everything, there's leeks, there's lettuces, there's at least, and there's 5 or 6 fruit trees. So it's sort of like the entire food basket in one little garden around a table. The basket up here is chickpeas, which probably none of us have ever seen a fresh chickpea in our lives. This was my first experience. He's my husband, that's why I got to experience it. So anyway, I guess I should reveal all those connections. Okay, so this is Lois Weinberger. He is like super busy, so, and probably I could never afford him, but he's agreed that he would do a portable garden, but it's going to be one of these ones where you go around and you just collect local soil and see what will grow. And it's interesting because if anyone followed, the last project in the turbine hall at Tate Modern was, it was called Empty Lots, and they had gathered soil from all over London and put them, it was a beautiful project. These suspended, suspended boxes, triangular boxes. But ironically, in my mind, what totally killed this project was the fact that so many people felt compelled to, the guerrilla gardeners who came back and threw all the seed bombs into it. Because in my mind, I wanted to see what chance brought. I'm not angry at the guerrilla gardeners, and the artist said people will do with it what they want. But I feel like that in a weird way, that it ruined the chance. I mean, there was a huge element of chance that was somehow destroyed by people throwing seed bombs in it. But anyway, this will be chance because we're not going to invite the guerrilla gardeners from London to come to. Well, anyway, as you know, London is very far away these days. Very far away. Okay, so these are some artists in the Oyster Group, and they're called EM. EM is a riff on, we had a Belgian king called Leopold II, and he started something called the École Mondiale. Well, he wanted to initiate it this is my favorite, it was to train colonial expansionists. It's from 1905. Anyway, but EM is a contemporary group, and they have been going to different cities and trying to measure where the power structure of that city is, and then burying crystals under the city to heal them. So last year they buried 150 crystals under Warsaw in a pattern of a square. This summer they buried 323 under Brussels to heal Brussels, and I don't know how many they're going to bury in Sittard. But Sittard actually will need a lot of healing because it's very close to the very famous camelot plant. If you're a Dutch person, you know camelot, but Sittard is right next door. It's actually sandwiched between camelot and the largest car factory, I think, in all of Europe. Anyway, I should tell a funny backstory. So in 2005, SMAC invited me to Ghent to propose a show, and I proposed Ecovention Europe 12 years ago. And that day, by chance, the day I was giving my proposal, there was an article in the newspaper about how the Rotterdam, Antwerp, Cologne triangle is the singularly most polluted triangle in all of Europe. And so Philip van Kaltern is like, well, why do you want to do Ecovention Europe? So you just did Ecovention in the States. Why do you want to do it in Europe? And I was like, I don't know, but we need it. You need it. It's really polluted here. He's like, are you crazy? But anyway, I just think it's funny that I'm sure that, anyway, most of the art in the show actually was created in the last 10 years. So in fact, maybe it definitely needed to wait. I'm glad that he said no. Anyway, N55 is a Danish group. They're famous for making houses and bicycles and vehicles and indoor food structures. And 20 years ago, they made this air cleaning machine, and the last 5 years they've been making bicycles. So now they're going to put the two together. And of course, I have a fantasy that in 10 years, every city's bicycling rental project is a bicycle that cleans the air. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Get the tourists to come rent a bicycle and clean the air of the city. This is another Danish artist who's living in Australia. He was involved in the 2013 Venice Biennale. And I don't know if you remember this, but the Bahamas had that was the 2013 Venice Biennale had a climate change edge, in the sense that the Bahamas had a pavilion focused on climate change, and the Maldives had a pavilion focused on climate change. But what happened in the Maldives is they had a political coup in the middle of planning their pavilion, and he decided to break away because he thought the new director was a dictator and didn't care anything about climate change. So he broke away. That's why it's called the Maldives Exodus Caravan Exhibition. And ironically, by breaking away, he could go on tour. So he's been touring the world, giving his own message of climate change. And inside this caravan, it's basically an archive. It's got lots of different art projects by different artists that all deal with climate change. I think there's something like 30 artists involved. These are American artists that have been living in Denmark, and they had done this Anthropocene campaign that has to be on bicycles. But you can see some of the, let's see. Well, unfortunately I can't really read it. But anyway, they've only done 7 letters. It's meant to be the whole alphabet, but they've only done 7. But the idea is to somehow educate the public about what it's like to live in the Anthropocene and what the effects of the Anthropocene are. This is a Polish artist named Cecilia Malik. In my mind, she is Europe's most successful activist artist of all time. She's stopped people from destroying rivers. She's stopped people from building on butterfly migrations. And the most hilarious thing is that she had no interest, she loved nature, but she had no interest to become an ecologist when she started all this. She was a painter, and she was a mother. She had 2 children, and about 5 years ago, she started climbing trees to find her own space, to get away from her family. And then she was posting them on Facebook, and then people were like, "Oh, what tree are you going to do tomorrow? And you should climb this tree." And if you go, oh, no worries. I'll drink some water. Oh, there's a timer? Oh, that's very... But I don't... Oh, yeah, my screen is independent. Oh, because it's a battery. But the projector doesn't work.
I know. We'll have to wait. But don't... 5 minutes to read the end.
Well, maybe there's a question. Well, let's take a question. Does anyone have a question?
Well, thank you.
No questions? Okay. What story? Oh, about Cecilia? Okay, sorry. Okay, so Cecilia, I guess there's a novel by...
Right. Oh no, it doesn't work.
I can't tell.
That's true.
We are on our... I'm shouting. I'm trying to shout. Can you hear me in the back? Not really? You can hear me, kind of? Okay. So, there's a story by Italo Calvino where the little boy climbs up a tree to escape his parents. And this is her favorite childhood story. Or I guess it's not a childhood story. It's a favorite story of hers. Oh, here we go. Okay. Am I back? Not really. No. Okay. Hello? Not yet. Hello? I don't think it's on yet. So maybe there's another breaker. Is there another breaker?
I think that one you just need to give it a...
Okay, okay. So to get away from her family, she was climbing trees, and then she was posting them on Facebook, and then all sorts of tree huggers, they have a lot of tree huggers in Poland, they started emailing her. They're like, oh, are you interested in the environment? And she's like, well, I'm not interested, but that's not why I'm doing this. And then they were like, well, we really would love to have an artist help us with our protests, because we have these protests and no one ever comes and they don't get any media attention. And so the minute she went to one of their protests, she said she immediately figured out what was wrong with them. And so she now, every time someone has a protest, she's involved from the very beginning, and she has, like, for example, for the butterfly, when they did the protests to keep the land from being developed, she had 500 people in Poland make butterfly wings, and they didn't just wear them to the protests, they wore them all around Poland for 3 weeks before the protest, getting attention. So the press has really picked up on the way she does, the way she galvanizes people, both to get attention from the press and to get the politicians to change their mind, because Poland is a very complicated country. Oh, you don't have the image. Oh, yes, you have the image. Okay, great. Maybe I'm back. Let's see. My mic is working?
You got
Great.
a new chance.
Thank you. Okay. So in this project, there was a river involved, the BLK River, or the L is a W, but I don't know how you would say that, BLK, whatever. Maybe there's a Polish person here. Anyway, so she was having an exhibition. So she had, I don't have images of that, you can find it online, but she was having an exhibition in a gallery, and she used the time of the exhibition for everyone who came was making these fabric braids. This is just like reclaimed fabric. That's how the braids made. And these people, I think they made something like 12 kilometers of braids. And while they're braiding, they're supposed to be thinking of the rivers. And so she's now used them in 3 different contexts. So she used them to hang them from a giant tower. If you've been to Krakow, you know in the town square they have a very big tower. Then these are 3 separate performances where the braids have been used. And it's not clear how we're going to do a protest in the Netherlands next year, but I'm sure that we will find some river with some public who wants to do a protest, that she can come with her braids and organize a protest. This is a project that's now part of Emscherkunst in Germany, Insect Society. And Henrik Haakensen was actually one of the few European artists that was in the original Ecovention show. He's very involved in biodiversity and science and biology. It's pretty controversial, though, because he's not always the kindest to animals. But the last 10 years, or the last 15 years, he's hardly worked with animals. I think he did a project in Mexico with butterflies. So this was really the first time in 15 years that I know of that he did anything again with animals. But he's been doing mostly indoor work, suspending trees, like art with nature, but not necessarily having anything to do with changing ecologies or dealing with ecologies. This is a historic piece from 1972. MoMA had a competition for Italian artists to come up with a kind of interesting building. And this is the group that won the vegetable house. And I think it's important because this is exactly the same year that the Harrisons started their survival series, when they were growing food indoor too. But what's interesting, so the craziest thing, this just happened 2 days ago. I was at the MoMA archive, and I was all excited because I thought, oh great, I found the files, I'm going to get the blueprint, I'm going to finally get the dimensions of this thing so I can rebuild it in the Netherlands. Because as curators, we often refabricate historical works. The artists are living, so I'm working with them, but they don't have the models or the blueprints. And after all this energy, the file at MoMA was totally wrong. It was a totally different artist, and however they didn't know this was really baffling to me. So when you go to MoMA, you have to make an appointment like months ahead of time, and they put the files out for you. And of course, when you find that the file is a fake file, it's very frustrating. I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to figure it out, but I don't have any information about the scale at this point, or the plants. Or all I know is that they had in their mind a vegetative house where the people are. I mean, it's interesting that this photo has people around it, because in their mind, it was meant to be like an aroma bed that you were supposed to lie in your house and get excited and aroused by the smell of your food. So it's funny because it's got a little connection to Jean-Francois's edible environment. This is a very important, another Swedish, well, she's Swedish living in Berlin, and you might know her, she won the Cole Prize 2 years ago in 2014. But anyway, she's always working with lists of potatoes that are no longer grown, or potatoes that it's illegal to grow, or in the States she found a list of the commons and grew them in the States. In Europe, she's been trying to find lists of potatoes that the EU, they're not really banished, but they're not encouraged. So the EU has its own potato list, and every potato farmer is stuck with that list. So in the case of Holland, the province is Limburg, and she will work with farmers in Limburg who are focused on heirloom potatoes and collaborate with them on growing them. This is it's interesting that you had fashion in your exhibition, because this is a young fashion designer in Antwerp, and she makes all her own fabrics. She hand dyes her fabrics, and it's not like every fabric is different. Like, she has maybe 50 different kinds of fabrics, and she keeps on doing them every year, but she just changes her designs. But she's the last, I mean, as you know, Belgium is very famous for its contemporary fashion, and she's the last fashion person in Belgium that's still fabricating in Belgium. So for her, the whole idea of the local, the sustainable, is all extremely important. And it'll be interesting because she's had her line for 5 years. It'll be interesting to see if she can keep it in Belgium when she's already pretty big. She shows at the #1 shop in Brussels for fashion. But it'll be interesting to see how she manages to stay small. I think, this is a piece that was in the last Documenta. This is another archive piece, but again about biodiversity. This was a collaboration with Donna Haraway, and I think they had 105 artists, European artists, all working on the topic of biodiversity. So it doesn't look like anything. You have to be inside and see the information and to see I think they even have like 80 videos in this document. We're not going to bring the pavilion from Documenta. We're going to find our own little local pavilion, but the information will be there. I think it's always, these kinds of projects need to have second lives. Okay, so I think I'll stop there. I have this as a PowerPoint, so if anyone wants to see more or have it, I'm happy, not as a PowerPoint, as a PDF. I'm happy to email it to anyone who wants to have it as something to take home. Thank you.
Very